Good afternoon, Good afternoon and welcome to this book launch of our great friend Elaine Cougler, and she's now published her 3 books in the trilogy, and we're so happy for her and so happy to be inside today instead of outside. It's a rotten day for a Santa Claus parade, but apparently that's what they're doing in Toronto. I'm glad we're here. That's great. So Elaine just asked me a while ago if I would kind of just be a little bit of a master of ceremonies and greet everyone and make you feel welcome. She's here today, and she's the person who's really going to speak. But she did send me an email, and she said there were a few things I could remember to mention. For example, there is this cake here, and you are all invited and encouraged to enjoy a piece of cake with us. This is maybe an opportunity for you to do a little bit of Christmas shopping. Probably lots of you maybe have your first copy, your second copy, even your third copy. And that trilogy looks so beautiful, and it's all done up in a red ribbon, which is why I got done up in a red dress today. Because it just reminded me of the ribbon on the trilogy. I still think that trilogy is a beautiful purchase as a gift to give. That it really is. It looks beautiful, and I know it's very satisfying to have the whole story complete. I mentioned that somebody at church today said, well, yeah, I read the first book of Elaine's, and I wondered, what comes next? And I said, Liz, there's a trilogy. Just keep on reading. Anyway, Elaine did suggest that there's a draw, and probably all of you, did you all sign up already? There is a draw. And of course that prize is a free copy of Elaine's book. And the other thing she mentioned, and I'm going to do this, and I tell you I have never done it before. She has suggested that if you kind of go online and kind of express your liking for and a kind of a review of the book on both Amazon and Goodreads, that means that the books that she has written kind of go up in the ratings, and that means they become available or of interest to a wider audience. And we are a very supportive little loyal group of readers here, but I know that Elaine would like the world beyond to enjoy this trilogy. And I just want to say, because I was thinking, I had no idea what I was going to say or what I was supposed to say on the way there. I don't know, one thing led to another, and I did think about my mother, who is still alive and well and will be 97 in January. But what was interesting, one thing about Mom that's kind of interesting is when she was 80, she published a memoir, it was like an autobiography, and it's The World According to Elsie, I'll tell you that right now. But it starts in 1920 and it takes you right up to the year 2000. And I am so grateful to have that book now, because it's available for my children. And I can't believe Mom only published 500 of this. She still gets calls from people, makes connections with people saying, we saw your book, and it was so interesting because my grandmother did this, or my dad was in the Air Force, and she refers to that. This, Elaine, is a treasure for your family. And I just heard you talk about the fact that the main characters are your great-great-grandparents. But how amazing that this current book is dedicated to your 2 grandchildren. I think that's amazing. So really, Elaine's the one who's going to talk. Welcome, Elaine, and congratulations. Yeah, we didn't even know, because if I did, I know you'll say.
Okay, when I do my next book launch in 10 years, you can have I told a few people, I'm a little bit tired. I've been doing too much of this. So I'm kind of excited to get this 3rd book out. There are other things that are running around in my mind, but mostly having a snooze is up there, you know. Anyways, I thought I would read a little bit to you from the legacy, and you'll notice that I've kind of adopted the new, come on in. Yeah, come on in. I've kind of adopted the same format for the 3rd book as I had for the 2nd book. And if you buy that group of 3, I redid the first cover as well, so it makes them all kind of match, which will make my brother Brian very happy. He gave me a hard time about that. Anyways, So this third book is based on William and Catherine Garner, who lived on the Plover Mills Road, which is a couple of concessions north of Thorndale. Everybody know where Thorndale is? And do you know that the Thames River goes across, goes up there, and there's a huge bridge that goes across. Huge bridge. That is where William and Catherine were. They had 200 acres on either side, like it straddled the river. And I just think of how valuable that land was to them back then, about this starts in 1817. And there were roads laid out, but there really weren't roads. I mean, it was mud and stones and all that kind of stuff. So the river was the main highway. So I think that my great-great-great-grandparents had a pretty nice piece of land there. Right now, if you go up there, and I hope you will, if you go up there and look on the west side of the river, you will see some pretty gorgeous-looking buildings there. I don't think William and Catherine's looked quite like that, okay? But somebody obviously thought it was a great piece of land. So this story is William and Catherine, and it's the story about the time between the end of the War of 1812, and it goes right up to 1838. And does anybody know what happened in 1837? Yes, I see some heads. Yeah, remember that thing that, I know, Rebellion of 1837. So, why was there a rebellion of 1837? If you want to know, you have to read this book. Anyhow, so, I started out early in the book still talking about William's parents, John and Lucy. And they they were still in the Niagara area, and William, and this actually is based on on the real John Garner that was there. I said William, I meant John. John Garner had enough of an education that he could help the people who were there with the land grants. And I don't know if you're aware that those grants that were given out to people in the late 1700s, a lot of them, they had no paper. And so they were written on the back of playing cards. And the playing cards didn't have nasty pictures or anything on them. They just had the numbers, and then you could turn it over. And if you do some research, I don't own one of these, but there are people who still own these playing cards. So that meant that land titles were really argued over because they were not specific. So apparently John Garner, who was one generation back, was one who actually helped people try to sort that out. I'm telling you the whole story here, but I'm really not telling you the whole story. So lest you think I'm spoiling it for you, okay? So Lucy and John, who are my fictional characters here, all of a sudden John is in jail. And why would John Garner be in jail? Anyways, Lucy went ripping off to present-day Niagara-on-the-Lake, and Ron and I have actually visited the courthouse down there and gone downstairs in the basement of the courthouse at Niagara-on-the-Lake. And you'll hear in the book, I'm not sure the part I'm reading today, but you'll hear the description, and that's exactly what it looks like. And I don't know whether it looked exactly like that back in the day or not. Does anybody remember in the second book what happened in Niagara-on-the-Lake? 1813, December, cold day. Say it.
The burning.
Yeah, the burning of Niagara-on-the-Lake. So there's a lot of new stuff that was built after that because the whole town was pretty much destroyed. Anyways, here we go. The warm weather returned, but Lucy barely noticed. If her men couldn't see the sun, she felt guilty enjoying it. although truth be told, she really didn't like the heat all that much. Some days her visits to the cells were a relief, especially the ones to John, still down in the cellar of the town hall. Meetings held in the large room upstairs meant William and Robert moved downstairs with their father, a brief chance to visit, welcomed by them all. The jailer had come to trust these Garner men as he moved them up and down. He rarely carried his rifle with him on these moves. Once downstairs, the three men could hear the shuffling feet and chairs sliding over the wood floor above. They even caught a few of the words, although not enough to discern what was being said. On one such meeting day, voices rose loud and stayed loud, and when the jailer brought Lucy for her visit, William and Robert peppered him with questions until he escaped back up the stairs. John had not heard much of the ruckus, but in the cell above, his sons had. Talking about the governor they were, Robert said. And they were none too complimentary, added William. I thought I heard old Mr. Mackay's voice, Robert said. I doubt he would come so far. John's voice, low and slow, surprised Lucy. Their son stopped talking as she leaned over to place her hand on his forehead. It's a town meeting. Everyone at the inn was speaking of it this morning, but I don't know much about it. She took John's hand. I'm afraid I just didn't pay any attention. She barely felt his fingers squeeze her own. Find out about it, Mama, William whispered. If they're talking about this damnable governor and his cronies, maybe we'll get some justice. For all of us. Robert's voice was low too. Even us rebels, he chuckled. I'd forgotten, Robert. If they learn you fought for the Americans, they're like to hang you. She sank back against the wall. Oh my Lord, what a pickle we're in. So true to Elaine fashion, I'm not going to tell you anymore. Have you ever seen that happen before? Yeah, so I was really scared when I started writing this third book. I knew I wanted to write this book, but I really didn't know what it was going to be about because there was really no war. First book was about the American Revolutionary War. Second book finished off that war and went through to the end of the War of 1812 and all the stuff that was going on at that time, and I really didn't know what I was going to write about here. Well, I needn't have worried. How many people in this room were teachers? Yeah, it takes one to know one, you know. Anyways, when Ron and I were doing teacher training at Aldhouse, we're old. We happened to be in the last class that did the 2 summers, 8 weeks one summer and 7 weeks the next summer. And we remember very clearly sitting in a class. The only thing we can't remember is actually the name of the course that we were so bored by. But it was about, I think it was philosophy of education, maybe, Ron. And every day somebody would stand at the front of an amphitheater and read from here and about some wonderful paragon who we should all emulate. And I remember one of those was John Strachan. Everybody heard of Bishop Strachan? Well, I remembered him too, and all the good things that were said about him, and when I started researching for this book, whoa, you're going to see a different side of John Strachan in this book. So I don't take away from all the good things he did. He was a self-made man who started from nothing, and you know, really the epitome of a self-made man. But he had the other side too. And I have to have a caveat here, and that is that it's a temptation to measure people's actions 200 years ago against the society we live in today. And of course, 200 years ago, there was no such thing as democracy in our country. Okay? There wasn't even a country, was Okay, so we have to keep that in mind. But anyways, that's just a little tantalizing bit about John Strong. So Lucy, pardon me, Catherine is back on the property that I told you about in Nizery Township. And by the way, at that time it was Nizery Township, not East Nizery and West Nizery as it is today. And she doesn't know where her husband is because he's disappeared. He went back to find out what happened to John and Lucy, his parents, and he's never come back. So, here we go. 2 days later, while the morning sun started its climb up through the trees all around them, Catherine and the children ate early and walked to the Dixon section. Everyone carried something. Catherine, 2 baskets of bread and preserves she'd made from wild strawberries the children had picked a few weeks earlier. William, a pot of rabbit stew, that's young William. The little ones, each with a gift they'd made for the 2 Dixon girls. Johnny had at first balked at taking a gift to girls, but agreed soon enough to her suggestion of making a slingshot and finding smooth pebbles for it. McGeesy, now there are 2 First Nations people that I write about here, and of course I won't be calling them First Nations people. McGeesy and Kiwidenak. McGeesy is the man's name, Kiwidenak is the woman's name, and those are Chippewa names, okay? Miki, with a huge saw and a thong-bound stone mallet, and Kiwi, carrying her own pot of something that smelled delicious, walked along with them. As the Dixons' clearing came into view, Catherine stepped ahead, anxious to set down her burden and to get the day started. The Dixons were ready too. A huge fire had been burning for quite some time, and over it hung a large pot, steam escaping its lid. The smell made Catherine hungry, even though she'd only just finished her oatmeal not an hour earlier. Surrounded by people they'd never met, Mr. and Mrs. Dixon shone with gratitude. And right off, Peter Logan took charge. People kept arriving, laden with tools and baskets of food, but Mr. Logan organized them all. Women settled their children either playing or stripping bark and saw to the food requirements for the large army of workers. Some of them stepped up to the saws with their husbands, and Catherine had a fleeting thought of her morning across the river sawing with Peter Logan and the rest of the men. These women held a saw every bit as well as a kitchen ladle. Catherine worked close to Mrs. Dixon. "Emma," she said, stirring the fire, organizing the food on the huge slab table that seemed to come out of nowhere, and keeping a watchful eye on the children. "Nigger!" The angry word carried across the workplace, even to the men hauling on saws, and certainly to the women preparing the food. Catherine dropped her knife and the half-peeled potato on the table. Solomon was in trouble, and she rushed to him. Will was already there, his arm around the little boy, and she silently blessed her son. Anger rose from her depths, but standing there in the heat of the day, the sun beating down and the frightened children staring, she forced a smile to her face. What should she say? Immediately she saw the culprit. A boy about Will's age wore defiance like a badge on his dirty face, his chin jutting out as he dared her to speak. She did not know this boy, nor his parents, nor where they lived. Perhaps they too were new to the area, but that did not excuse his rudeness. Solomon was one of her own now, and she would fight for him. "What's your name?" she asked in as soft and controlled a voice as she could manage. The boy said nothing, but looked away for a second, and the hint of a gloating smile covered his dark features. She glanced around to see a man had left off sawing and was walking their way. Will led Solomon over to the fire. Several of the other children followed, including Johnny and Eva. Others looked curiously from the defiant boy to her and stayed where they sat on the ground. The man strode into the circle and straight to the boy. She didn't know him either, but his look told her that he was no ally. She choked the dust from her throat. "Your boy has insulted my child. Your child? He's not yours. Anyone can see that. He's just a little boy and needed a home. I can tell you he would have no home with me. He waved his arm around. Or with most of the folks here. Send him back where he came from. That's just it. He has nowhere to go, and I have given him a home. Surely that is a good thing? She meant to shame him into accepting the boy and appeal to whatever good was in his heart. But the man took his son and brushed past her to pick up his saw and start working again. His son shifted from one foot to the other, watching his father and ignoring the children, who were now all at the fire. Lunchtime, Mrs. Dixon called. One of the things I wanted to do in this book is talk about what might have been going on with the other nationalities who are now part of our country and whose citizenship and so on has been and is still a source of heartache. We have trouble with our First Nations people, and they have trouble with us, and it's a thorn in our side that we can't just get along. It's a thorn in my side. And also, of course, we live north of the United States, and we all know about the Underground Railway and about the people trying to escape from slavery. And I wanted to bring those things in here, so you see them as sort of undercurrents in the novel. We haven't solved those problems, probably never will, but I thought it would have been too simple not to actually have some of those things in here. So that's what I've just kind of introduced there. And then I just have one other short thing. The other thing that was really interesting to me in my research was finding out how little difference there was from people on the north side of the Niagara River and people on the south side of the Niagara River. And today, of course, we all know that Niagara River and the Great Lakes, and we know where the boundary lines go, and we know that we are Canadians, and we know that they are Americans. But that wasn't like that in the day. They were brothers. So one brother lived on this side, and one brother lived on this side. And the War of 1812 really did as much as anything to try to show the difference between, and people kind of dug a line in the sand at that time because of some of the nasty warlike things that happened. So Robert, I did that in this book because Salim's brother Robert, he had fought for the Americans in the War of 1812, which some of you will remember. And he's fictional, by the way. And he is still living on the other side. And I have him living in Buffalo. And he's right across the river from where John and Lucy's mill was. And that's kind of fictional, too. But anyways, it was good for the story. So here's Robert. And I think I have to just say that Robert and Marianne, his wife, have, they've just become a stop on the Underground Railway. Okay? Does everybody know what I mean by the Underground Railway? You do, of course you do. So here they are. Heavy pounding woke them before the neighbor's rooster even crowed. Robert raced into the main room, Marianne with him, and pointed the family into the bedroom just as Thomas appeared at his door, rubbing his eyes and staring at the people in their home. Marianne sent him back to bed. "Do not come out, Thomas," she warned. They grabbed the extra bedding from the floor and stuffed it in their bedroom. "Get back in the bed," he told their guests, "like last night." The knocking got louder and louder. Marianne took one last look around and ran to the bed. Robert pulled the bedroom door closed and pushed his hair back off his face as he walked slowly to the door. He grabbed his musket from overhead. He lifted the bar awkwardly as he did not want to drop the musket. When he pulled the door open just a crack, the pressure from outside was tremendous. He jammed the musket into the space and by sheer brute force slammed outside into the same two men from last night and a crowd of neighbors and onlookers. Some he recognized and some he didn't, but he certainly knew the two before him. For a moment, all was silent. A few people had stepped up onto his porch, but most were in the yard rustling the fallen leaves and holding their coats and shawls over hastily donned clothing. One woman still had her nightcap on. Robert felt the cold and wished he'd taken a moment to get his own coat. "Where are they?" Spittle from the man's mouth dropped onto his beard, already frosty with frozen bits from his shouting. He held a club now. Last night he'd had a musket. His partner, however, still carried his musket, but now it was pointed right at Robert. He raised his own. "I do not know who you mean." He spoke slowly, tried to keep his anger in check, and hoped the family had enough time to hide. This crowd looked determined to search his home. He raised his musket and his voice. "I don't know what you want, but I have the right to protect my property, and you are all, every one of you, trespassing on my land." "You can't shoot us all," someone in the crowd shouted. "No, but I'll shoot one of you. Who wants to take a chance?" The yard was so silent, Robert thought he could hear the few flakes of snow in the air hit the ground. Neither man in front of him moved. No one in the yard moved. He gripped his musket harder and raised it to sight along the barrel. Suddenly, the door opened behind him. Ooh! The next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gladstone, put her hand to her mouth as Marianne squeezed in beside him. "She's in her nightgown, not dressed." Everyone talked at once and pointed at Marianne. He chanced to glance at her and couldn't believe what he saw. His very pregnant wife stood beside him in only her nightdress, stretched tight over her abdomen, and anyone could see she could give birth any minute. Those closest might even notice her nightgown move as the child kicked. Robert certainly did. "Go back inside, Marianne," he whispered. "Cover yourself." But she did not heed his words. Rather, she smiled at the crowd. "I have tea," she said, "and a few biscuits. It's early, but come inside if you like." With that, she turned and slipped behind Robert and back inside. For a moment, no one moved, but gradually people drifted away, shaking their lowered heads and saying very little to their neighbors. Robert lowered his musket a few inches as the two men in his face backed off. Obviously, there was no one in the house, or Mrs. Garner wouldn't have invited them in for tea. He could almost hear their thoughts. He stood firm until every last person had left his yard, and then he breathed a sigh of relief, lowered the musket, and went back inside. Thank you all. That was really just lovely to have so many people come, and so many have come and bought books and run away already. And so come on in, folks. Come on in. And I think what we're going to do now, if some of you haven't bought books yet, and feel free to come, and I'd be happy to sign them for you. Oh yes, we have to do a draw. Now there's a couple people who just came in. They should actually get their name